Earlier today, we took 19 kilos of fentanyl out of a house associated to supplying narcotics here to MacArthur Park.
So prosecutors accuse the officers of providing escort services to drug traffickers in exchange for bribes.
Patrol, where they seized $510 million of illegal drugs, that's cocaine and marijuana, that was interdicted at sea before it can reach the U.S. border.
84,000 fentanyl pills, enough to stop the hearts of every single person sitting inside Dodger Stadium on a sold-out night, with enough left over to fill a second stadium across town. That is what federal agents pulled from a cluster of apartments within walking distance of a public park, where families brought their children to feed ducks on Sunday mornings. At 9:47 on a Tuesday evening, the perimeter around MacArthur Park closed like a jaw. No sirens, no warning, just exits vanishing one by one until there was nowhere left to go. Before this story ends, you will know exactly who made that park into a marketplace. You will know who kept it running. And you will know what agents found behind a steel door that was never supposed to be opened by anyone wearing a badge. This was not a street corner problem that grew out of control. This was architecture. And someone, sitting in a room far from the smell of that park, had drawn the blueprints. The air above Alvarado Street carried the smell of grilled corn and exhaust fumes. Vendors were still working their carts. A bus pulled away from the curb with its interior lights humming yellow against fogged windows. The benches along the lake were occupied, not by tourists, not by families at that hour, but by the kind of stillness that exists in places where people have learned not to look too closely at what moves around them. The temperature had dropped below 60. Fog sat low enough to blur the streetlights into soft halos, and somewhere between the taco stand on the corner and the money transfer shop across the street, a 13-year-old boy was handing a folded napkin to a man who never made eye contact. Then the world changed. Team 1 moved from the east along Wilshire, sealing the boulevard in both directions with unmarked vehicles that had been circling the block for 40 minutes without stopping. Team 2 came from the south, 6 agents on foot cutting through the park itself, walking past the lake like joggers until they reached their marks. Team 3 hit the apartment complex on the west side, ground floor, second floor, third floor, simultaneously. And Team 4, the one nobody on the street ever saw coming, entered through a service tunnel beneath a parking structure that connected to a basement corridor running under a row of businesses on 7th Street. The first door broke at 9:51. The sound was not what people imagined. It was not cinematic. It was flat, heavy, and final, like a car hitting a wall at low speed. Then the flashbang, a white so bright it existed behind the eyelids. A pressure wave that did not hurt but erased thought for 2 full seconds. Boots on linoleum. Commands in English and Spanish overlapping until neither language made sense. Smoke curling against the beam of a tactical flashlight that swept left, then right, then froze. The first apartment held what they expected. Plastic tables. Digital scales still dusted with residue. Heat-sealed bags stacked in columns. Burner phones, 11 of them, plugged into a power strip against the wall like a charging station at an airport. Agents counted 19 pounds of methamphetamine in vacuum-sealed bricks. Cash in grocery bags. Not briefcases, not safes. Grocery bags from a store 3 blocks away, stuffed with rubber-banded bundles that smelled like dryer sheets because someone believed that would fool the dogs. But the second apartment, the one behind the money transfer shop, held something else entirely. A steel door, locked from the outside. The agent who reached it first, a DEA tactical specialist named Rivera, did not kick it. He paused, looked at the lock, looked at the hallway behind him. Then he spoke one word into his radio that changed the entire trajectory of what this night would become. People. He could hear them breathing on the other side. What was behind that door would transform a narcotics operation into something federal prosecutors would spend the next 14 months trying to name. And what was written in the ledger found on the table beside those scales would eventually lead investigators not deeper into the streets, but upward. Into offices, into systems, into places where the word cartel was never spoken aloud because it did not need to be. 17 blocks from MacArthur Park, inside a cyber forensics lab that smelled like stale coffee and electrical heat, a woman named Diane Okafor sat in front of 3 monitors. She had spent 9 years building financial maps of narcotics networks, tracing the invisible rivers of cash that moved beneath legitimate commerce, like water beneath pavement. Her colleagues described her the same way every time someone asked. She never reacts. Not to amounts, not to names, not to the scope of what she uncovers. She processes, she maps, she moves forward. At 11:23 that night, when the seized phones and ledgers from MacArthur Park began uploading into her system, Diane stopped moving forward. Her cursor blinked on a single line of text buried inside a group chat recovered from a phone with no contacts, no photos, and no call history. The chat was labeled with one word, and that word was the key that unlocked everything that followed. Operation Lakebed. Not a cartel name, not a street name, a project name, the kind of name someone gives to something they intend to maintain, to build upon, to protect with layers of insulation so thick that the people at the bottom never know the shape of what sits above them. The financial trail did not look like drug money. That was the point. It moved in amounts designed to be invisible. 800 here, 1,400 there, 2,200 under a name that matched a day laborer who had never opened a bank account in his life. But when Diane mapped the destinations, when she followed every transfer, every prepaid card reload, every cash pickup across 5 states, they converged. All of them, every stream, every tributary, every underground fork in that river of money flowed back toward a single repeating signature on authorization documents filed with the city of Los Angeles. Not a warehouse, not a stash house, an office, 4th floor, municipal building. And the name on those documents belonged to someone who had never been arrested, never been investigated, never once appeared in a DEA file. Until tonight. If what you just heard put something cold in your chest, that feeling is not going away. Because what comes next is the part that was built to stay invisible. Tap like right now, not for me, not for a number on a screen, but so this reaches the person tonight who still thinks the system catches everyone equally. Do not leave. The next 90 seconds will rewrite everything you thought you understood about this park. At 4:17 in the morning, 6.5 hours after the first perimeter closed around MacArthur Park, a second operation launched. This one was not quiet. This one was not subtle. 43 SWAT officers, 14 DEA strike teams, 6 FBI field units, 4 Black Hawk helicopters cutting low enough over Westlake and Pico Union that residents later reported thinking it was an earthquake drill until they saw the searchlights. Inside a mobile command center parked on Wilshire Boulevard, screens displayed a map of Greater Los Angeles with 51 red markers glowing across it. Each marker was a confirmed node in the network. Stash apartments, motel rooms used as holding cells, auto shops rigged for transport, pawn shops functioning as leverage vaults, corner stores processing cash under false receipts. 51 locations, all breathing, all connected, all feeding the same organism that had wrapped itself around MacArthur Park like a vine strangling a tree from the inside. Teams moved on 12 locations simultaneously. The staccato of breaching charges echoed across neighborhoods that had been asleep moments before. Westlake, Pico Union, Koreatown, South Los Angeles. Each team reported back in fragments. Structure cleared. 14 detained. Structure cleared. Narcotics confirmed. Structure cleared. Weapons recovered. Structure cleared. And then silence from Team 7. Team 7 had been assigned a motel on Westlake Avenue. Room 214, Room 307, Room 1119. When they reached 119, the room with the surveillance monitor, the room that could see every approach before anyone reached the door, they found something that was not in any briefing document. In the closet of that room, behind a false panel that looked like drywall but swung open on a hinge, agents found 11 people. Not armed, not fleeing, not speaking, sitting on the floor in a space designed for storage, not breath. Some had been there for 2 days, some longer. Their shoes were taken, their phones destroyed, their names written not in any immigration file or hospital record, but in the same debt ledger recovered from the apartment behind the money transfer shop. They were not criminals, they were currency, held until their labor repaid a debt that grew faster than any human being could work. One woman, agents later noted she could not have been older than 20, had a number written on her forearm in ballpoint ink, 14,600. Not a phone number, a price. The amount someone had decided her freedom cost. She did not speak when the agents entered. She just looked at the door and waited for it to close again. It did not close, not this time. In 6 hours, federal teams dismantled more infrastructure than this network had built in 3 years. 29 arrests, over $9 million in frozen accounts. Enough fentanyl seized across all locations to kill the population of Los Angeles twice over. Enough methamphetamine to supply the entire West Coast corridor for a month. But the arrest that would define this case had not happened yet. Go back to the beginning of this story. Go back to the number I gave you first. 84,000 pills in those initial apartments. At the time, it sounded massive. Now, knowing what 51 locations held, knowing what those motel rooms contained, knowing what that pawn shop safe was protecting, 84,000 pills was not the operation. It was one night's inventory at one node in a machine with 50 others just like it. Hold that number differently now. I will wait. There is a man named Gabriel Rojas who had spent 16 years with the Los Angeles County Public Safety Infrastructure. He had worked his way through ranks not with ambition but with patience. The slow, quiet kind that made other people trust him without thinking about why. He believed in the system because the system had never given him a reason not to. He had attended the same interagency briefings for over a decade. He had seen operations succeed. He had watched bad actors get arrested. He had faith, not blind faith, but the earned kind, that the machinery of justice moved slowly but moved correctly. What the federal server logs revealed that morning quietly dismantled every year of that faith. The network had not survived for 3 years because it was clever. It had survived because it was protected. Patrol routes around MacArthur Park had been adjusted 6 times in 14 months, each adjustment creating a window between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., where the western edge of the park received 0-foot patrol coverage. Those adjustments were not random. They were requested, through proper channels, with proper signatures. 11 officers across 3 precincts had received payments routed through the same prepaid card system the network used for drug proceeds. Not large amounts, never enough to trigger review. 1,200 here, 1,900 there. Time to arrive the same week patrol schedules were filed. Stash apartment lease applications, filed under fake names, had been approved by a housing inspector whose brother-in-law appeared in the motel ledger as a driver. Health code complaints filed against businesses near the park, legitimate complaints from real residents, had been closed without inspection 14 times in 18 months. By the same office, under the same authorization code. And that authorization code, the digital signature that appeared on every closure, every patrol adjustment request, every lease approval that should have been denied, belonged to a man named Victor Calderon. Fictional title, Deputy Director of Municipal Coordination, City of Los Angeles. He had never touched a fentanyl pill, never stood on a corner, never entered a motel room, never spoken directly to a single cartel member whose name appeared in any filed document. He did not need to. He had access to scheduling systems, inspection databases, complaint routing software, and interagency communication channels. He had a pen. He had a password. And with those 2 instruments, wielded quietly across 3 years of small decisions that individually looked like nothing, he had carved a corridor of silence through the middle of a city. A corridor where drugs moved freely, where people were held without rescue, where cash flowed upward without obstruction, where 11 officers collected payments for blindness they were told came from somewhere that did not matter. He was not the cartel's soldier. He was their architect. And every raid, every arrest, every door kicked in during those 3 years, he had known about in advance, because the notifications went through his system first. This was not a failure of oversight. This was not a gap in protocol. This was the protocol, rewritten by one man who understood that the most dangerous weapon in any system is not a gun. It is access. If you are still watching, you already understand this stopped being about a park a long time ago. Drop the word architect in the comments below. Not because I am asking for engagement, because that word is now burned into this story and you need somewhere to put what you are feeling. Subscribe, because the next story goes further than this one. And send this to one person in your life who still believes that every part of the system is pointed in the same direction. They deserve to hear this tonight. Everything you heard in the first half of this story, every agent who breached a door, every phone that was seized, every location that was raided, go back and listen to it again. Because now you know that the man who approved the patrol gaps was watching those operations unfold on the same notification system the agents used. Every move they made, he saw first. And every move he made after that kept the network alive for 3 more years. Let that sit for a moment before we continue. Federal analysts expanded the map beyond Los Angeles. The network's supply chain did not originate in Westlake. It did not originate in California. Fentanyl precursors moved through ports in Long Beach aboard shipping containers labeled as industrial cleaning solvents, routed through a logistics company registered in Nevada that had never shipped a single legitimate product. Methamphetamine arrived via highway corridors running through Arizona and New Mexico, transported in magnetic compartments welded beneath agricultural trucks that belonged to a farming cooperative that existed only on paper. Cash moved outward in the opposite direction. 5 states. 14 money transfer locations. Prepaid card networks purchased in bulk from a wholesaler in Texas, whose compliance officer had been on the same prepaid card payroll as the 11 officers in Los Angeles. The distribution was not chaotic. It was elegant, built to absorb loss, built to survive any single raid, built to continue functioning even if an entire city node was dismantled, because 3 others in neighboring states could absorb the volume within 72 hours. Analysts calculated the throughput. In 14 months of confirmed operation, this network had moved narcotics valued at more than $200 million through the greater Los Angeles corridor alone. And the parallel nodes, in Phoenix, in Las Vegas, in Portland, in Houston, suggested a combined continental value that federal accountants were still calculating months after the arrests. Then Diane Okafor found the final file, buried on the deepest encrypted partition of a server seized from the room above the seafood market on 7th Street. A document that had been accessed only twice, both times from a terminal registered to Victor Calderon's municipal office. 4 pages, no names, no dates, just structure, a hierarchy chart, a resource allocation plan, a timeline measured not in months, but in decades, a blueprint, not for a single operation in a single park, for permanent infrastructure, a plan to make the greater Los Angeles corridor the fixed continental headquarters of a distribution network so deeply embedded in legitimate municipal systems that no single investigation, no matter how large, could extract it without dismantling the systems themselves. Not a crime hidden inside a city redesigned around a crime. The system had not been infiltrated. The system had been rebuilt. Somewhere in the Westlake neighborhood, on a street that federal agents walked past 6 times that night without stopping, there is a woman named Maria who has not heard her son's voice in 4 months. He was 19. He had crossed the border legally on a work visa. He took a job offered to him by a man outside a convenience store on Alvarado who said he needed someone to watch a door for 6 hours. Just watch it. Simple. The pay was good. That was the last decision he made freely. His debt started at $300. For the room they gave him, for the food, for the ride to the motel. It grew to $8,000 in 11 weeks. He was moved 4 times. His phone was taken after the second move. His shoes were taken after the third. When agents found him in that closet on Westlake Avenue, he was number 6 of 11. He could not tell them his mother's phone number from memory because they had made him delete it. Maria still calls the number he had when he crossed. It rings once and disconnects. She does not know that her son is alive. She does not know that he was recovered. She does not know that the men who held him wore no masks because they never believed anyone was coming. Federal investigators now know their names, every single one. Entire blocks around MacArthur Park lost families who had lived there for generations, not because they chose to leave, but because staying meant watching their children walk past open-air drug markets every morning on the way to school. Schools in the Westlake district lost enrollment steadily for 3 years. Businesses closed. Not because they failed, because they refused to pay. Corner stores that had served the community for 20 years were replaced by storefronts that processed hundreds of thousands of dollars monthly while selling nothing to anyone who walked through the front door. This was not crime happening inside a neighborhood. This was a neighborhood being consumed by a system that had been given permission to feed. Power does not always arrive in an armored vehicle. Sometimes it arrives in a memo, a scheduling change, a complaint closure, a signature on a lease approval that nobody reviews because the man who signs it has been signing things for 16 years, and nobody questions someone who has been there that long. And by the time anyone understands what was constructed, it has been standing long enough to feel permanent. Federal investigators confirmed that the indictments are ongoing. Victor Calderon was arrested without incident at his home at 6:14 in the morning. He said nothing. 11 officers across 3 precincts have been suspended pending federal charges. Rafael Mendez, the broker, was detained in the room above the seafood market. He too said nothing. But 16 people were removed from rooms where they had been held against their will. 29 people were arrested who had held them there. And for the first time in 3 years, The corridor through MacArthur Park that had been carved open by one man's quiet signatures was closed. Not with fanfare, not with celebration, with the sound of a steel door being opened from the outside, by someone who was finally allowed to reach it. This story is fictional. The warning carried inside it is not. The names are invented. The mechanics are documented. The pattern is real and repeating in cities that will never make a headline until someone decides to look. If this moved something in you, do not let it settle back into silence. Like this. Leave the word corridor below, because that is what was built here, and that is what was broken. Share this with someone who lives near a park they stopped walking through and never fully understood why. Subscribe, because the next story has already been written by the world. I am just the one who will tell it to you. And remember the people who spent months behind locked doors waiting for someone to come. That is why this exists. Every name, every official, every event depicted in this story is entirely fictional, constructed for dramatic and narrative purposes only. The law enforcement agencies referenced are real organizations. The patterns of corruption, trafficking, and narcotics distribution described reflect documented real-world concerns studied by journalists and federal investigators. The story itself, its characters, its locations, and its events are not real.